look, I'm very excited about Tyler Morris. I'm very excited about Samaj Morgan. They don't have the experience that Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson had. They just don't. And the depth behind them was a question mark, especially with Carmelo English was a second-year receiver along with Fred Moore and Samaj Morgan, two guys we think are going to step up this year. Thought English was going to come in and play some Z, backup slot, have a role. He ends up not being a part of the program anymore. Darius Clemens, again, is a bummer in terms of the guy we thought he was going to be, not the guy he has been. The expectation of him being the star X receiver this year wouldn't have been fair. It just wouldn't have, but it's still a guy not there anymore, right? So Michigan does make a couple additions in the portal, a very interesting one in Amorian Walker. Josh, I want you to kind of get into, I think people have some misconceptions about, he wanted to play wide receiver. Yeah. They moved him to DB. He's at Ole Miss. The reason he came back was like, hey, let's get you back at receiver, right? And then CJ Charleston, we can get into him as well. But those two guys come in and they kind of join the Mo receivers, Morris, Morgan, Moore. That's going to be fun all year. But how do you feel about what Michigan's done here at the receiver position and then just the group overall now? Is there a wide receiver one candidate? Is there enough depth for whoever, probably Orgy, but whoever the QB is going to be?
Yeah, well, to answer the number one receiver question first, I mean, it's going to be Tyler Morris. He's going to be wide receiver number one. And I don't think it's going to be close. I mean, again, like Orgy, there's been so many times that I've had unprompted people be like, hey man, Morris is a dog. Like I know for a fact, one person told me like, oh, I was talking to someone and, I was asking, who's going to be that dog on the offense. And Tyler Morris was the first name that was brought up. And they even went as far as saying like, yeah, no one's really talking about him. Like people need to be talking about Tyler Morris more. And, it's easy to not talk about him because realistically, he only has that one play from Alabama. And then I'm not even downplaying that play. I mean, that was an impressive as hell play, but that's the only thing he has. But however, at the same time, if that's what he has, then, you got to look at the upside of what he could bring. And it's a lot there. So I think heading into the season, Morris obviously is the number one guy. And, I think Colson Loveland's going to be added into the mix too, and is going to take some catches. Marlon Klein, obviously. But, as far as their additions, I mean, would I have liked them to see them bring in more experience? Yeah. Some size. Yeah. But, Morion Walker is an original guy that, that should have stuck at wide receiver. I think that was just Jim Harbaugh trying to get too cute with the process of, finding potential guys who can make position switches. And, so it is what it is. I think, there's plenty of promise there. I mean, just you can tell by the offers of a kid that a lot of programs kind of see it, see the projection there. So Walker, yeah, I mean, I would expect him to get involved somewhat as a kind of a bigger ish receiver on the outside. And CJ Charleston, I mean, yeah, you're talking about a guy from Youngstown State. I mean, I'm not going to dog the competition because we've seen guys who have played lesser competition come in and perform really, really well. So, if he can get anywhere near his stat line he had last year, which was like 500 odd yards and 5 touchdowns, I think that's a good year for him. And I think that's a good thing for Michigan if they're getting that kind of,
he's arguably the Carmelo English replacement. He's the guy that can play the Z slot backup wide receiver 4. Yep. So if I go from a guy who hasn't seen the field to a guy who has experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, that's what Michigan did with all of their additions, really, is they kind of, in a way, kind of traded like for like, but added guys with experience. I think that's the big thing is that, you're trading guys that didn't really see the field much, don't have much in terms of experience, and then you're replacing that with guys who've seen a lot of football. I think that's the ideal way to address departures, but also not stealing depth chart spots from people who also deserve to play too. So, and then obviously Samaj and Fred. I think Fred's the most interesting receiver out of all of these groups because this guy can do it all, really. I mean, he can do the dirty work. He can take the little short slot routes and also can go long. So, yeah,
Might
he's
be
a
the
guy
fastest
that,
guy on the team. Yeah.
yeah, and he's a guy that could do a lot of different things for Michigan, and that could pay off for him big time. And then obviously Samaj is looking to take that next step. I think he just needs to continue what he's doing and then just add to it, take it to the next level. No issues with the trajectory of Morgan, and if he can get involved in the special teams as well, even better, because I think he's got the ability to make plays in pretty much all facets of the game. So, yeah, I mean, is this group gonna pop out at you when you go through other receivers in the Big Ten? No, but that's never really been Michigan's MO of late. Just need to get these guys snaps. You need to see what you have. You're just fortunate this year that you have a Colson level and to kind of offset the inexperience that you have here, and then obviously you got to factor in Marlon Klein as well, someone that will absolutely see some snaps too. But again, and we've said this multiple times. There's this team isn't bad. It's just inexperience. You just don't know what you have. There's talent here, and just this, and the same thing goes with the receivers. There's talented receivers here. You just don't really know what you have, and obviously that stuff gets taken care of on the field, and we'll see pretty quickly. What these receivers look like as the season goes on, for sure.
I agree with Josh. I would have liked to have seen Michigan pick up a big body outside receiver there in the portal, but that's, to be honest, they're just inexperienced. Just like Josh said, there's the talent is there, but the experience is not. And I do think having a big body there on the outside to throw the ball to in like a 50-50 type of play would have helped Michigan this upcoming season if they couldn't get the passing game going. And CJ Charleston really isn't that. Amorian Walker could be. He's tall and lengthy, but he's not terribly experienced either. So
it's like getting Andrew Anthony back.
Right. Exactly. And so it's really tough to figure out what this wide receiver room is going to be because you've got so many guys that really do ooze with talent. And Amorian Walker has a lot of potential. Tyler Morris, we saw it against Alabama. Samaj Morgan showed out in multiple occasions there late in the season. The Purdue game, that end around, the Indiana game when he proved his jukebox nickname there and got into the end zone. Like and against Iowa too, the punt return that he almost took back for a touchdown. He's shown potential too. Fred Moore, we saw in the spring game. There are a lot of guys with a lot of potential, but experience is just going to be the biggest thing. And it's going to have to come quick because, like you said, Trevor, Texas is week 2, and you don't have time to just sit there and try and figure stuff out.
It's weird because we forget what the wide receiver room looked like going into last year. I'd argue in terms of depth of potential, they are better this year, right? Cornelius had been a leading receiver. You knew what you had with Roman Wilson. You didn't know he was going to be as good as he was because he had been pretty consistent the 2 years before that. Behind them, though, I was still really intrigued about Clemens' potential, but he hadn't done anything. Tyler Morris, again, potential, hadn't done anything. I think he had like 2 receptions at that point. Samaj Morgan was a freshman. Right. I think people forget, we talked about the hype coming out of spring with Samaj Morgan and Fred Moore, but what did we say? How many times do we see that with freshmen and then it doesn't actually translate to the field? Right. Mm-hmm. So it was very much Cornelius Roman, and then I guess we'll see. And this year with Morris, I've talked about going into last year, had he had stayed in the Z role and Roman been in the slot, I think Morris has a much bigger year. But what happens is Roman kind of takes over, stays in that Z Ronnie Bell role, and that opens the door for Samaj Morgan to play more slot. So now Morris is in his natural position. Samaj is in his natural position. Fred's going to contribute. I hope Walker, again, I don't know what you need from him. If he goes out, gets 20 receptions, a few touchdowns, a couple hundred yards, I'm happy. Like you said with Charleston coming in, I would have loved, I can't think of the guy's name now, but there were, obviously McCulley from Indiana was an early transfer portal target I was really intrigued by. Was it Banks from Wake Forest ended up going to Nebraska right around the time JJ declared. And then the Syracuse receiver ends up at Utah. Those are 6'4", 6'5", 210 guys with experience that would have been really nice to add. But, and Josh mentioned it, it's been mentioned in the comments, I think the answer is on the team, and I think it's Colston Loveland. And I did an article. I don't want to get into this too deep. Go to Michigan.Rivals or search by the numbers Colston Loveland. I knew I was going to find like wide receiver 1 level numbers for Loveland when I did this, but I was blown away. So after week 5 last year, Loveland had, it's only one, but if you look at the receptions, 30 to 29 with Roman, 32 for CJ, more yards by 5, same number of touchdowns, more yak, same number of first downs after week 5. So you take out Roman's big early non-con games, Loveland's already there in terms of wide receiver 1 production, right?
Yeah.
Where it gets crazier, though, is that's not as a tight end. Loveland last year lined up in the slot 49% of the time, out wide 18.9%. That seemed like a lot to me. I looked into it. No tight end in college football lined up out wide more than Colston Loveland last season.
Wow.
And that was with Cornelius Johnson on the roster, right? So that number theoretically could go up, right? And okay, what does that mean? Is he a deep threat? Yes, he's the best deep threat receiver in college football. They just didn't take advantage of it. 7 targets, 7 receptions on throws over 20 yards or more to Colston Loveland, 206 yards, 29 yards per reception, 3 touchdowns, so 3 for 7. Only 11% of his targets were deep, but literally perfect. Perfect QB rating, perfect receiving rating. Why not more? Right? So we'll see, but maybe that's your answer at the X receiver. Marlon Klein has been brought up a ton and his rise, right? Maybe that's it. Maybe Loveland's going out wide more. Maybe he's in the slot more and he's the wide receiver 1 big body answer. And if that's the case, and I have the speed guys that can do the crossing routes and do the end arounds and the short yards with big yak in Morris, Morgan, Moore, Walker, I actually really start to like what they're doing with this group a lot. So we'll see how Loveland factors in. We didn't even mention Donovan Edwards, really.
Yeah.
Technically wide receiver last year wide receiver 3 in terms of receptions last year. He could be a big part of the equation as well. But yeah, I think I agree with you guys. They didn't get that big body with experience I would have liked. Walker's intriguing. I'm glad he's back. Jim Harbaugh has made a lot of really, really good decisions when it comes to position changes. That was one in hindsight where, maybe you were worried about the depth over at corner, and then DJ Waller, Jair Hill ends up, maybe that one didn't make a ton of sense in hindsight. But hey, here we are.